Hong Kong, 1965. 7 men were inside the 4th-floor training hall on Nathan Road when the door was locked from the inside. By nightfall, one of them would need stitches above his right eye. Another would leave without speaking. And Bruce Lee would refuse to discuss what happened there for the rest of his time in Hong Kong. The challenge had not been advertised. No newspapers were invited. The building manager was told only that a private athletic demonstration would take place after hours. The challenger weighed over 300 pounds. A professional boxer with documented knockouts. He had called Wing Chun stage fighting in front of students the week before. He had laughed when Bruce's name was mentioned. 5 seconds into the first exchange, something happened that none of the witnesses expected. No one in that room claimed it looked like cinema. It looked violent. Uncomfortably close. And far less controlled than Bruce preferred. But what changed that night was not the outcome. It was the decision Bruce made when he realized he could end the man permanently. He didn't. And that choice unsettled the room more than any strike. Hong Kong, 1965, Kowloon District. In early 1965, Bruce Lee was 24 years old and already divided between 2 reputations. In Hong Kong, he was remembered as a former child actor and a student of Ip Man's Wing Chun lineage. In the United States, he had begun teaching a modified approach to Chinese martial arts that unsettled purists. Word of that experimentation had traveled back home. Some instructors felt he was moving too far from tradition. Others believed he was exposing techniques too openly to non-Chinese students abroad. A few privately questioned whether his methods could withstand full contact pressure outside controlled demonstrations. The local boxing community had its own skepticism. Western boxing gyms in Kowloon were small but disciplined. Fighters trained with timed rounds, heavy bags, roadwork, and sparring partners who hit back with full force. To them, many traditional kung fu schools appeared overly compliant, too cooperative, too dependent on prearranged drills. Bruce stood between these worlds. He had the speed and structure of Wing Chun. He admired the efficiency and conditioning of boxing. He spoke openly about adaptation. That alone created friction. According to Chow Man-kit, who was a junior student observing at the time, tension had been building for weeks before the challenge. There was talk that he made things look good, Chow recalled years later. That he moved fast, but nobody had tried to hurt him seriously in Hong Kong. It was not entirely fair. Bruce had fought in his youth, street altercations, rooftop challenges, but those stories were unevenly documented and often exaggerated in retelling. By 1965, the issue was no longer whether he had fought before. The issue was whether his evolving approach could survive against a conditioned heavyweight trained to deliver knockouts. His status was unstable. He was not yet protected by film contracts or international fame. In Hong Kong's martial circles, reputation traveled through whispers, not headlines. If he lost decisively to a boxer, particularly a larger one, it would confirm suspicions that traditional Chinese trapping hands and centerline theory collapsed under Western punching power. If he won cleanly, it would validate his claim that structure, timing, and economy could overcome raw size. There was more at stake than pride. Bruce had begun speaking privately about stripping away what did not work in combat. He criticized rigid forms. He encouraged sparring. That made him controversial among traditionalists who valued preservation over modification. One senior practitioner reportedly remarked within earshot of students, "Let him fight a real puncher. Then we will see." The comments circulated. By midsummer, the challenge was less about 2 men and more about 2 approaches to fighting. Bruce understood this. Witnesses later said he was quieter than usual the week before the encounter. He trained longer sessions, particularly entry drills, closing distance against a forward-driving opponent. He also conditioned his torso. Repeated medicine ball drops. Partner body shots. Short-range striking against wooden apparatus. He anticipated power. At 24, Bruce was lean, around 135 to 140 pounds, compact, defined, fast. Against him stood the possibility of a 300-plus pound boxer accustomed to absorbing and delivering force in sanctioned bouts. This was not a demonstration for students. There would be no choreography. No applause. Chow remembered one small but telling detail from the afternoon before the meeting: he wrapped his hands himself. Slowly. Not like for a show. Like he expected something to go wrong. That expectation, that something could go wrong, was what separated this encounter from friendly exchanges. Bruce was confident. But he was not reckless. And in 1965, in Kowloon, confidence without caution could end a career before it began. The challenge was accepted quietly. No flyers. No public announcement. But among those who knew, the stakes were understood. Reputation. Credibility. Direction. One fight could tilt all three. And Bruce Lee was walking toward it without certainty of the outcome. The man who waited for Bruce on the fourth-floor hall in Kowloon was known to the few present as Lao, Big Tiger, Chan. His full identity remained murky, even decades later, but multiple witnesses corroborated the same essentials: a massive frame, measured discipline, and an almost unnerving calm. Lao's weight was approximately 320 pounds, concentrated in thick muscle from years of labor on the docks and disciplined ring training. His shoulders were broad, forearms corded, and stance rooted. This was not a street fighter relying on chaos, this was a man conditioned to absorb and deliver devastating force. Every movement in his shadow suggested calculated intention. His record, as noted by Chow Man-kit, included regional professional bouts, several knockouts, and a reputation for body shots that could render a man breathless in a single round. Witnesses emphasized he had sparred with fighters of similar size and could adjust mid-fight without panicking, a credibility that made the encounter distinctly dangerous. Lao did not attend the meeting to look impressive. He came to test a claim. He had reportedly laughed at the notion that Wing Chun techniques could withstand real punching power. Stage fighting, that's all, Lao had said in a side conversation weeks prior. Show me if he can move under real pressure. He was not naive. Several witnesses later recalled him observing Bruce in the days leading up to the challenge, noting stance, hand alignment, and footwork. He asked probing questions about distance and timing. The psychological weight of Lao's presence was tangible. Standing nearly 2 feet taller in reach and weighing more than double, he could crush the average practitioner with a single overhand hook. Witness Wang Shunliang's former student noted, he had no arrogance in movement. He simply moved like he expected to win, and he might have. Lao's training style complemented his size. He was deliberate, prioritizing impact over flair, control over showmanship, and timing over improvisation. Unlike the theatrics of some sparring exhibitions, his strikes were meant to hurt, to test structural integrity in a fight. His credibility was reinforced by experience. He had spent years working the docks in Hong Kong, where brawls often escalated quickly. He understood leverage, how to brace for impact, how to drive forward without overcommitting. He also knew the danger of underestimating a smaller, faster opponent. Witnesses recalled that Bruce recognized this immediately. Bruce's eyes, focused and unblinking, measured not just the man's size but the space he commanded. Bruce later confided in one trusted student that he knew a single mistake could be catastrophic. The moral tension of the encounter crystallized before the first strike was thrown. Bruce was faced with a real threat, not symbolic, not performative. Lao could, and likely would, punish mistakes severely. Every decision in the coming minutes carried the risk of injury, humiliation, or worse. The stakes were therefore physical and psychological. Bruce's choices would define his credibility in both worlds he navigated, traditional martial arts and the emerging culture of realistic combat. For the witnesses, the challenge was as much about observing human judgment under pressure as it was about technique. Chow Man-kit later described the tension in the room: even before they touched, you could feel it. One man's weight, one man's precision. And both of them knew, this was real. Something could break. Lao Chan, in his quiet confidence and heavy presence, represented a singular test, the collision of raw mass and boxing experience against speed, timing, and calculated risk. And in that small hall, the air was already charged with anticipation. The fight took place in a fourth-floor training hall on Nathan Road, Kowloon, a space familiar to a few Wing Chun students but otherwise unremarkable. The wooden floorboards creaked under weight, the walls were bare, and the humid summer air pressed against the skin. A single ceiling light cast shadows that stretched long across the floor, highlighting every movement with stark clarity. 7 men were present that evening. 3 were Bruce's Wing Chun students, including Chow Man Kit, who had observed his training closely. 2 were friends of Lao from the boxing community, their arms crossed as they evaluated distance and posture. 1 was a neutral acquaintance, whose presence ensured the interaction did not escalate outside controlled boundaries. And the 7th was the building caretaker, stationed quietly near the doorway, aware that something tense was unfolding above but instructed not to intervene. The location was private by design. No publicity. No cameras. No audience. The door was locked, a subtle but concrete signal, the interaction inside was self-contained. Rules were minimal. Both parties agreed on the essentials: no eye gouging. No groin strikes. No weapons. Stop if one man could not continue. There were no gloves, no formal rounds, no referees. The hall itself became a confined arena, each man aware of the distance between the walls and the potential for physical collision beyond their strikes. The emotional atmosphere was immediate and oppressive. Witnesses later described a mix of anticipation, caution, and fear. The heavier, slower presence of Lao contrasted sharply with Bruce's lean, coiled precision. One student said, even before the first movement, you felt it in your chest. Like the air itself was waiting for something to snap. Bruce prepared methodically. He removed his shirt, not for effect but practicality, ensuring no fabric would catch on his arms or restrict motion. His hands were carefully wrapped, tight, precise, each layer applied with controlled tension. The meticulous preparation suggested he anticipated genuine impact. Lao kept his boots on, emphasizing that this was not an exhibition but a test in realistic conditions. Each step he took produced a muffled thud on the wooden floor, a constant reminder of his mass and the physical reality Bruce would face. Witnesses later noted subtle spatial choreography before any strike was thrown. Bruce shifted lightly on the balls of his feet, feeling the distance between himself and Lao. Lao measured stance and angle, his hands held in a loose but functional guard. Neither man spoke. The tension was entirely in anticipation and bodily calculation. Humidity and heat added their own variable. Sweat began to bead on foreheads, dripping onto the floor, making footing slightly uncertain. Muscle memory would be tested under real physical strain, and the human element, fatigue, overcommitment, hesitation, could alter outcomes more than technique alone. Psychological stakes were evident before a single strike. Bruce was aware of his opponent's size, weight, and punching power. Lao was aware of Bruce's speed, agility, and unpredictability. Both had to account for the other's potential, the possibility of injury, and the moral weight of causing real harm. Witness Chow later reflected, the room wasn't just a space. It became a measuring field, of courage, control, and intent. Every inch mattered. The conditions were deliberately controlled yet inherently dangerous. Private, minimal rules, small space, witness scrutiny, and real physical disparity. The hall itself amplified tension, making every step, strike, and breath count. This was not a demonstration. It was a calculation under pressure, a test of risk management and precision, and the stage was set for the first exchange, where theory would meet the brute reality of mass and speed. The space between them measured roughly 6 feet, a distance that felt deceptively small given the disparity in size. Bruce Lee's posture was coiled, weight-centered, eyes fixed on Lao, Big Tiger, Chan. The boxer's frame was a wall of mass, his shoulders low, hands loose but ready, breathing steady and deliberate. It was Lau who initiated the contact. His steps were heavy and measured, each footfall pressing against the wooden floor with authority. The first strike was a probing jab, extended to gauge timing and reach. Bruce did not flinch. His hands rose in a centered guard, forearms angled to absorb impact without overcommitting. The jab slid harmlessly along his guard, producing only a dull thwack against his forearm. The second attempt was not experimental. A full right cross, aimed for Bruce's head, carried the momentum of weight behind it. Witnesses recall that the room seemed to tighten with each beat of the punch. The air between the two men contracted as Bruce moved. Rather than retreating in a straight line, he shifted slightly off-center, turning his body to deflect the blow while reducing the force absorbed. As the punch passed, Bruce entered Lau's range, an aggressive, compact step forward, closing the distance where the heavier man could not fully extend without overcommitting. His body remained low, knees bent, coiling energy in his legs. A strike followed, a vertical palm thrust beneath Lau's chin, not fully extended, but precise enough to unbalance him slightly. Witness Chow Man-kit described it as, not flashy. Not cinematic. It landed like a hammer on soft steel, controlled but undeniable. Lau staggered, but Bruce was not unscathed. One body shot landed along his ribs, thudding with a dull resonance that drew a sharp intake of breath. His torso absorbed the impact, but the bruise forming there would be visible for days. Witnesses later emphasized that the exchange was real, no choreography, no deliberate pulling of strikes. The room's psychological tone shifted. The disparity of size and weight was now undeniable. For a brief moment, the advantage seemed to belong to Lau. Each movement Bruce made required acute precision, a misstep could have resulted in a bone-crushing hook or clinch. Bruce responded with short, rapid strikes along the centerline, designed to test balance and reaction without overextending. Lau reacted predictably. He raised his arms to protect the head, pivoted slightly, and tested Bruce's commitment with deliberate jabs to the torso. Each strike created small echoes in the wooden floor, a physical punctuation in a tense rhythm. Witness Chow later recalled the subtle but critical micro-adjustments. Bruce didn't just move fast. He moved smart. Timing, angle, body alignment, every step counted. You could see him calculating in fractions of a second. After roughly 5 seconds of direct engagement, Lau's nose was bleeding from a glancing strike. Bruce's breathing was shorter, chest rising and falling with controlled effort. The exchange had escalated from test to measured conflict, the initial probing now replaced by a genuine clash of skill, size, and intent. By the end of the first exchange, both men had assessed one another physically and psychologically. Bruce had confirmed the boxer's reach, weight, and defensive tendencies. Lau had witnessed speed and precision that could disrupt brute force. Neither had overcommit, yet both had felt the risk of real damage. The first exchange did not end with a decisive blow. It ended with an unsettling awareness in the room. Bruce was capable of extraordinary precision, but he was vulnerable to the sheer mass and power of the boxer. Lau was formidable, but not invincible to timing and targeted strikes. The tension thickened. The psychological stakes were no longer theoretical. Every movement now carried the weight of potential injury, every strike was a choice, and the next step could determine whether the confrontation would escalate to genuine harm. After the initial exchange, the atmosphere in the hall grew heavier, almost oppressive. The air was thick with sweat, dust, and the subtle metallic tang of blood from Lau's split nose. Bruce and Lau faced one another, measuring, adjusting, neither willing to concede an inch. The disparity in size was undeniable now. Every movement from Lau carried kinetic weight that Bruce had to redirect or absorb. Lau shifted tactics. He stopped aiming at Bruce's head and targeted the torso with hooks and body shots, seeking to exploit his mass and the natural leverage of his larger frame. One hook landed squarely against Bruce's right ribs, forcing a sharp exhalation and a brief contraction of his abdomen. Witnesses later noted the sound, a dull thud that echoed across the wooden floorboards. Bruce's body had absorbed it, but his breath came faster, a subtle indication of strain. The boxer then attempted a clinch, pressing forward with a combination of weight and leverage designed to pin Bruce against the wall. In that confined space, the room's physical limits became immediate. Bruce's back nearly touched the wall, reducing mobility and creating the real risk of being trapped and struck repeatedly. Chow Man-kit later recalled the moment as critical. "I honestly thought he might be pinned. It felt inevitable. The weight, the space, everything was against him." But Bruce responded with precise hip rotation and footwork, using the wall for leverage. A short, vertical strike to the chest forced Lau to stagger backward. Then came a sequence of centerline strikes, rapid, compact, controlled, targeting the head and torso without overextending. Each movement was a calculated risk, balancing effectiveness against potential overcommitment. At a critical instant, Bruce observed Lau's hands dropping slightly. Witnesses described the silence that followed, a pregnant pause in which Bruce had a clear path to a decisive strike, potentially capable of rendering Lau unconscious. It was here that the confrontation moved beyond physicality and entered the realm of moral choice. Bruce's hand stopped mid-motion. His eyes focused, muscles coiled, every fiber aware of the damage he could inflict. He chose restraint. Instead of a strike to the throat or head, he redirected force to the chest, a zone that incapacitated without extreme harm. Lau collapsed to one knee, breathing hard, stunned but still alive. The psychological weight in the room shifted. Bruce's decision not to continue, not to exploit the opening fully, left a subtle unease among the witnesses. No one doubted his skill or capacity for decisive violence. Instead, they now confronted his awareness of consequences, the mental discipline required to restrain a body primed for lethal force. The physical stakes remained high. Bruce was still bruised along his ribs, his chest and shoulders ached from absorbed impact. Lau's face bore a split above the nose, a testament to the precision and weight behind Bruce's strikes. The confined hall amplified every sound, labored breathing, scuffed feet, the subtle thwack of hands and feet against the wooden floor. Each echo reinforced the reality of what had just occurred: two men, pushing to the edge, calculating every strike, every response, with human limitations in play. Emotionally, Bruce had faced his own vulnerability. He had been cornered, pressed against his physical limits, forced to confront the destructive potential within him. For the witnesses, the moment was not cinematic. It was unsettling in its realism. One observer later said, "The strongest man in the room wasn't the one who hit hardest. It was the one who knew when to stop." By the end of the escalation, the hall had shifted from a test of skill to a demonstration of restraint, judgment, and psychological awareness under threat. The fight had reached its peak tension, and Bruce's moral decision, to exercise control over lethal potential, left an indelible mark on everyone present, shaping both the man and the legend in subtle, profound ways. The room remained silent for a full minute after Bruce stepped back. Lau, Big Tiger, Chan lowered himself fully to one knee, chest heaving, a small stream of blood tracing from the split above his nose. His hands rested on his thighs, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. This was not theater. It was a test, and he had survived it only because Bruce had chosen control over destruction. Lau required stitches for the cut brow, though his pride remained intact. He did not accuse Bruce of foul play. Witness Chow Man-kit remembered the boxer's words later: "He hits inside. You feel it before you see it." Bruce, meanwhile, examined his own bruised ribs, the subtle swelling along the right side of his torso. He had taken real damage, but it was minor relative to the risk he had faced. Observers later noted that he remained unusually quiet, avoiding the triumphant demeanor typical of public demonstrations. Psychologically, the encounter lingered. Bruce had confronted his own capacity for lethal force, recognizing how easily skill combined with timing could inflict permanent harm. That awareness shaped his subsequent training. He intensified torso conditioning, explosive entry drills, and body resilience exercises, focusing not on impressing spectators, but on surviving and controlling real confrontation. For the witnesses, the night etched itself into memory not through spectacle, but through human tension. The physical disparity between Bruce and Lau made the restraint palpable, the room had borne witness to a rare combination of speed, precision, mass, and moral calculation. As Chow reflected decades later, the speed wasn't what shook me. It was the choice. Every man in that room felt it, he could have ended it. And he didn't. The encounter also influenced Bruce's evolving philosophy of martial arts. He became more intentional about adaptation over tradition, efficiency over formality, and the subtle balance between offense and defense. In public, he remained approachable and often playful. In private, his awareness of human vulnerability deepened. The legacy of that evening was quiet but profound. Lau reportedly respected Bruce afterward, acknowledging the precision and judgment required to neutralize a man of superior mass without permanent injury. Students of Bruce would later hear fragments of the story, warnings, reflections, exercises derived from what he had learned, though Bruce himself spoke of the event rarely, almost never publicly. The strongest impression was not the knockdown or the strike. It was the moment of moral and psychological choice, crystallized in the tension between skill and consequence. For Bruce Lee, the encounter confirmed the dual necessity of technical mastery and ethical restraint. One student later recalled Bruce's private reflection: size matters. Speed matters. But the strongest man in the room is not the one who wins. It's the one who knows exactly how much damage he chose not to do. Silence followed that observation, as though the weight of the night remained unspoken, but indelibly understood. The night of 1965 in Kowloon was over. The legend, however, had quietly shifted, not in fame, not in spectacle, but in depth, consequence, and human reality.